Hello everyone. Good morning. Welcome to our Project Lotus webinar. Our topic for this webinar is addressing Asian family conflicts. So today I'm here with Ethan, um, Ethan Durham, which is my fellow Project Lotus host, and also Miss Lee, she's a child and family therapist in the area. And so she's going to be talking to us today about how we can address conflicts that might come up in our Asian households, um, and also how these conflicts might relate to our culture and how uh, our culture plays a big role in how we should solve conflicts.
Mhm. So the topics that we're going to be covering today are the perspectives of both parents and children in Asian households, as well as we're going to talk about dealing with conflicts that may arise, how culture plays a big part in this, and then if you guys have any audience questions, we'll also answer those as well. Earlier on in the week, we sent out surveys to collect questions from anybody who wanted to ask questions, and we put them together, so we'll be asking those at the end also.
So if anybody at any point has a question or a point then that they want clarified, just feel free to ask in the chat, or you can even turn on your mic for a few seconds and just ask the question and we will answer it. So yeah.
Great. Thank you for having me, guys.
Of course.
No problem. How are you?
I'm great. How are you guys today?
We're doing good.
Yeah. So we can just go into our first topic that we want to cover. So conflicts are bound to arise in any relationship, whether it be a friendship, a romantic relationship, or of course our families. And a big reason why these problems start, and I believe, is because we don't often can't see the perspective of other people. And
Yes.
when we can't understand the perspective of other people, that's when we might have disagreements that escalate. So one big aspect that we should cover first is how do we understand like the perspective of another person, in particular our child's.
I think first I would like to just talk about what it's like being Asian American, because there are two very different cultures. As you know, Asian culture is more collective and Western culture is more individualistic. And in so many areas, they clash because in Chinese culture, hierarchy is very important. So if you come from a traditional Chinese family, you don't talk back to your parents. That is not part of the culture, right? Whereas in America, to understand each other's perspective, that's a new concept for many Chinese family, unless they have been living here for a while. At least this is what I have observed so far. Of course, there are always exceptions. So coming from that perspective, how do you find a balance between respecting your elders and still have each other listen to their perspectives? If you start from that point of view, then it becomes clear that you have to find a balance. I want to hear your perspective, but I, at the same time, want to respect the parents. The parents, I want to hear the child's perspective, but they haven't lived long enough as I have. They don't know what life is like, and I want to tell them how to live, right? And to find that balance is tricky, but at the same time, it's very exciting because this is something that you have both cultures that you can take the good from.
Yeah.
Basically, what you're saying is that
Yes.
in Western culture, it's more like individualized. So like people tend to like be able to talk to their parents more often than in Asian households, and so that could definitely cause like conflict to arise. So like our question is like, how do we go about understanding? How does a parent go about understanding a child's perspective, and vice versa? How does a child go about understanding a parent's perspective? Like how do we improve that communication aspect?
So one thing I would suggest is to figure out what is the cause of the conflict. is it culturally causing, or is it intergenerational? Is it developmental? For example, as teenagers, you're trying to find your identity and you have a lot of questions and conflict with your parents. Is that a developmental conflict, or is it cultural? So it really depends on the situation. Can you give me maybe one example?
One issue that our audience brought up was cultural assimilation, which
Mm-hmm.
is, for anyone who doesn't know, it's basically when a uh, person's culture sort of begins to resemble the culture of another group, and that
Mm-hmm.
often happens in Asian households where our families are very much following Eastern culture, but out in the real world, we tend to be more involved in Western culture. So that was one issue that was brought up. Like, often children in Asian households want to assimilate more towards Western culture, and that might cause some divide and some conflicts.
Yes. Um, so each household is different at their acculturation rate. And one thing to ask is, what are my values? What are my Chinese values that I really want to keep? And so when you're coming from that perspective, you can talk to your child about, this is a very good value to keep because, for example, respect the elder, or, uh, well, let's just say respect the elder. That's a good value that I believe, as a parent, I believe that we should keep. So you start from that point, the values, and then you talk about, well, what are some Western values that are important for you? And that can be very beneficial for the family as well, because we are living in America, and there's no way that we can just isolate ourselves from the Western culture, right? But there are lots of good things from both cultures that we can incorporate. So it's very important for family to sit down and discuss, what is it that is valuable for you?
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that is a very good point, that it's not just that one culture is better than the other, but we should find a healthy way of taking good aspects from both cultures into our
Mhm.
households.
Yes.
Mhm.
And that's something that is difficult for many parents, because in Asian culture, usually the elders decide the rules. And for them to come to this country and have to learn to listen to children, that's tough. That is not something easy for parents to do. So this is something that have to be adjusted, have to be talked about, have to spend time. You want to invest that time because you are basically building a new family structure that is unlike traditional Asian culture, unlike Western culture. You're creating a new family structure, and that can be tremendously beneficial for kids and for parents too.
I think we can continue down this talk of cultural struggles.
Mhm.
And so I know in Eastern culture, a lot of the focus is on the group. So
Mhm.
people do things for the group, while in Western culture, there's a lot more individualism
Yes.
and personal like choice.
Mhm.
And so one of our audience was wondering what to do if their child wishes to pursue a career path or a future goal that isn't what is best for the family or best for them in the future.
Okay. Well, first of all, how old is the child? If the child is 6, then you can expect that the child will change their idea when they're older, right? If the child is teenager, ready to go to college and ready to think about their future, then that's a different story. So what I would suggest is for the parents to listen for the reasons why the child wants this career path, and do research. What are the pros and cons? What are the pitfalls? What are the risks? What are the benefits of this new career? And then you can open up conversation. Because if you just say, no, I think this is a bad choice, then you basically shut down conversation. If you start to do some research yourself as a parent, then you at least you get to know, who knows, you might start to change your mind. Or the child will say, oh yeah, this is a bit risky. Maybe I should have a backup plan. Maybe I should think about other ways to approach this career path.
Right.
So I would say research on this new career path that your child is interested in. And the message you're giving your child is, I hear you, I take you seriously, and you are becoming an adult, and I trust you.
And I think that's so important for parents to be able to listen to their children about what they want to do
Yes.
going forward in their lives. And I think that as a parent, your role, I'm not saying like how you should be parenting, but I think as a parent, it's so important that you help push your kid into the right direction and help
Yes.
them to assess all of the pros and cons of the choices that they make, right?
Yes. Yes.
So going off of that topic,
Mhm.
giving your child some freedom like that
Mhm.
can be risky, right? But as I said before, pushing them in the right direction is what's so important. So another question that we have related to freedom is, how do I find a healthy balance between giving my child their freedom and keeping them safe?
Again, it depends on the age of the child.
Right.
Um, we're living in a society where there are a lot of choices. We're bombarded with choices either online or outside, friends, schools. So it is a very hard for parents to understand, especially if parents are new immigrants. Their childhood is nothing like ours. And for them, it probably is more scary to give more freedom for the children. So again, open conversation is very important, and to discuss what is danger, what is risky, and also to find a balance between trusting your child, because eventually you can't protect your child forever. If
Mhm.
the child hasn't learned how to protect him or herself, then one day they're just going to get in trouble. So you want to find that balance. And this takes time. And you need to discuss with your child all the time what you think is dangerous. And then also to measure it. Well, is this really a big danger? Or is it just a little bit? If in that situation, what would you do as a parent? If you were the child, if I'm in this situation, what would I do? What would I suggest my child to do? And the child can also say, well, this is what I would do. So
Mhm.
these these situations are complicated because there are so many situations that you can consider dangerous. And then when you start talking about it, it might seem less or it might seem a lot more.
I
Right.
think that's a good point. Or just as our parents should be able to understand or should try to understand our perspectives, we as children should also try to understand the perspective of our parents who have obviously uh, lived through more in their lives because they're obviously older. They're our elders, and they also have more experience. And their like experiences, if they are immigrants, might be different than our experiences.
Yes, yes,
And so that kind of goes back to the whole having an open discussion, being able to have that open discussion
yes,
as a family. Um,
yes.
so that brings up the question: how can a parent help their child to be more open to discussion, more open-minded, more willing to listen to their perspective, especially if their perspective is so um, like opposing to the child's perspective?
Yes. So there's several ways to go about this. And also it depends on the family, what kind of communication style the family has. One thing is to tell stories because stories are interesting, they're relevant, to tell stories like specific examples from your childhood, what it was like to be in a classroom, everybody has uniform and everybody cannot talk. We just have to listen to the teacher. What was that like? And then you can talk about what was it like for a child in America that, oh, you don't have to wear uniforms. Oh, you can, sit whichever way you want. And through stories, you can find the differences in perspective and also understanding. Another thing I would suggest is have specific questions instead of just like, what was it like when you were a child? You can say, well, what was it like in a gym class when you were younger? Did you have gym classes?
Mm-hmm.
Or what was it like to wear uniform all the time? What was it like to have longer hours and shorter lunch break?
Mm-hmm.
Have the questions be specific.
I like that.
Yeah, that's good. So a problem that comes along with these dividing cultures and households is a
Mhm,
lot of time the child might start to distance themselves from the rest of the family.
mhm.
And I think this is like seen a lot in Asian households. Like I can relate to this a lot where I tend to like stay in my room and not interact with the rest of my family for long periods of time. And so
Yes.
one of our viewers were wondering like, what should we do if this distance begins to like be too large where the child just stays in their room all day and doesn't interact with the rest of the family.
Mhm. So I'm going to suggest something that's a little bit, uh, maybe some parents will not like this.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think it can connect parents and children is to do video games together, to be online together, because this is where we're getting all the information now, whether we like it or not. Our connection with the outside world is through the internet. If you can do something together on the internet, then you can connect in a new way that probably parents had never done before. And that's one way to connect. And also, what is it that is keeping the child in the room? Is it family conflicts? You don't want to be part of the family conflict? Or is it internet addiction? Or is it other things? So you want to find the root cause of the reason why the children want to stay in their room and not interact with families. And interacting with families needs, you need to make that commitment nowadays. It's so easy to just go to the internet. Whereas when you have to talk to your parents in person, you have to make that effort. It's no longer something easy in today's age.
Mm-hmm. So you've said something about how a child might be isolating themselves in the room due to like a stressful family conflict or something like that. So now I kind of want to transition into the whole dealing with conflicts part of the discussion. So the first question is, what should I do when my spouse and I are fighting to not affect the child? That was a question asked by one of the audience members.
So even if you don't want to affect the child and trying to fight outside of the house or not show the children your conflict, the children can still feel it. They can feel the tension. And I think it is a great opportunity for parents to show conflict resolution. If you show that the children that you do have conflicts, but you know how to come to an agreement, a compromise, then you're showing the children that, hey, you don't have to be afraid of conflicts. And like it or not, it's going to happen no matter what with anybody. But then you show them a tool to do that. How do you resolve conflicts? I
Mm-hmm.
know that's easier said than done because in the heat of the moment, to solve conflict is not that easy. So you want to find time when you're calm and you discuss strategies. And there are lots of strategies online about conflict resolutions that you can see which works for you. So at the time, at the heat of the moment, you can start to try to utilize the strategies.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that tip. Yeah, I think there's like a lot of different strategies and they work differently depending on the household. So you should try out
Right.
different strategies to see which one works best for your household.
Yes.
For sure.
Um,
And I think it's really important in those conflicts that people are able to like take a step back from things and reevaluate what's going on,
Mhm.
the root cause of it, and then kind of getting to the bottom of that, and then looking for the conflict resolution. For
Yes.
sure.
And I would like to add that um, when you're calm, you want to really think about the affection you have for your family members. That is what keep us together And during conflict, in the back of your head, you have to somehow remember that, hey, I love this person. This person is important to me. And we just have to find a way to get through this problem. With that in mind, you have more chance of solving a conflict.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like anger like is or like tension or just a feeling that you want to be right is a lot big part of what how arguments escalate. And I think I know like in my personal life when I'm like having an argument, not just with like my parents but like with my friends, like I have to like take a step back first before I
Yes,
come to like a help come to mutual understanding. So I have to like often like remove myself and
yes.
calm myself down before I continue talking about it. That way that anger is not the only thing in my head.
That's a very good strategy.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Also, what another way that you can do is to repeat what the other person just said, because that can also give you time to calm down and to show the other person that you heard them. And also you start to hear yourself like, oh, is that what I just heard? Or did I hear something else? Did I get another message from the other person?
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons conflict sometimes arises, the perception or the way that some people perceive a message from another person. And so, yeah, communication and listening is very important when it comes to dealing with conflict. But related to the question about how children may be stressed out because of conflicting interests between parents, what if this is another question? What if one of the spouse members, or what if one of the questions asked was, if my spouse and my child are involved in an argument, what should I do?
Mhm. I think it depends on the conflict. Is it the child breaking the rule? And if those rules are set by parents, then I would definitely align with your spouse to enforce that rule. But if the conflict is something else, you want to try not to side with anyone because you don't win either way. If you side with your husband, wife, then the child feel left out. If you side with the child, the husband or wife, you're not supported. So you want to try not to get in there, but use I statement. Like, I see that you guys are having a conflict. I see the reason for the conflict may be this. Please tell me, is that what's going on? Try to keep on saying my point of view. I see this. I hear this. And that way you don't get involved. And also that will calm down the situation a little bit and then ask them, what's going on? Is there some misunderstanding or is there where's the conflict? Then there might be more chances of finding a compromise and lower the tension.
Is this the same with like fighting between children where you shouldn't side and you should act as sort of the mediator?
Exactly, yes. And also with children, it depends their age. If they're small, then you want to use physical touch to hold them together and sit them down and calm them with your hands. And then talk to them slowly and repeat what they're saying, basically telling them, I hear you, I hear what you're saying, and I hear the other person, what you're saying. Now, with older kids, you can't do that. You don't hold them down, right? So you, again, you use, I hear you saying this, I hear you saying that. And with older kids, the best is to have them come up with a solution, a compromise, instead of you giving them, because that would help them figure out how to resolve conflicts in the future
Mhm.
Yeah.
and reinforce their solution.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Say your child does like break a family rule that is destructive of your values. What types of punishments do you think would be appropriate?
Okay. So first of all, I wouldn't call it a punishment because that just sounds harsh and it divides you and your child. It just makes like, I'm the boss and you break the rule and here is the punishment. I would use consequence. What kind of consequence would the child have to face? Again, it depends on the child, the age of the child, and it depends on the situation. If the child is very young, then you want to enforce they have to feel the consequence. So whatever the problem is, the consequence has to be related. Especially, let's give an example. If the child ate candies when they're not supposed to, then you want to use the candy as the consequence. Well, if you eat candies, then you can't have candies later on. It has to be related. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You cannot say, okay, you ate candies when you're not supposed to, then you don't get to have IT time. So those are not related subjects, and it gets confusing messages from the parents like, oh, I broke this rule, but then I get punished for something else.
Mm-hmm.
So the consequence has to be relatable.
Right. I agree.
I think it also it relates to your age, different. A lot of the stuff when dealing with conflicts relates to the children's age and maturity, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And also it has to do with boundaries, because if they break a rule, it might be just testing the boundary, and boundary setting has to be set at a young age. And if they know that I break a boundary, I have the consequence that I have to face, then when you're older, it becomes part of your life. It's not something drastic. Also, parents might be able to help the child face the consequence if they give them choices. Like, you can amend what you did by doing this or that. You can amend your mistakes by maybe washing my car or helping with the dishes, and that can give them more choices, more in control of their life. Yeah.
I like that answer. And so since we're nearing the end of our discussion here, I would like to go over some audience questions that we haven't quite covered yet.
Mm-hmm.
So we could probably go through these a little faster now. And
Okay.
so one of them is something pretty prevalent in Asian American households is the focus on academics and doing well in school, right? And so I think one of the things so important to Asian parents in particular is applying academic pressure to their child, or pushing them in the right direction, right? And so one of the questions was, should I apply academic pressure to my children? If so, how do I do it in a healthy way?
So this is a loaded question because, again, it depends on the situation. It depends what do you mean by pressure. It's not a bad thing to encourage, because it can be a sign of caring. It can be a sign of parental love when you're pressuring your child. But it can also be harmful if it's too much. So it really depends on the situation. Since we don't have much time, I think I cannot get into this right now.
Okay.
Yeah. Next, this was a question from the audience.
Mm-hmm.
So, my child relies on me too much. How do I help him or her become more independent? Or how do I motivate my kid to do things more by themselves and be more independent?
Is it emotional dependence or physical dependence?
I think it's dependent on the parents to do certain tasks or help them with things.
Mm-hmm. So you can start by getting the child's opinions in small things and supporting them in their opinions, so that basically showing them that their opinions count. They can decide things for themselves. You can say that, for example, you can say, well, do you prefer apples or orange for dessert? And encourage them to do that, instead of saying, oh, we're having dessert, we're having apple for dessert, we're having orange for dessert. Just encourage the child to make decision. From small things, it can become bigger decision making.
Right.
Decision making is a huge part of being independent.
So basically what you're saying is showing that they're able to make a decision on their own, kind of reinforcing that they're able to be more independent,
Exactly.
and kind of building that confidence within them to
Yes.
be more independent more often.
Yes.
I like that answer. That was great.
Yeah. So finally, our last audience question was, how do I have a good quality conversation with my teenager? And I think this is especially relevant to teens because that's sort of when we're going through that period of time where we start to come into our own, we start to develop more of our own opinions, and it's generally like a uneasy and stressful time for everyone. And so how do we keep those good quality conversations while with our teenagers?
Okay, so like to point out, it's a hard time for parents because they're losing a child in a way. They're gaining an adult in the family. This transition, from their point of view, they don't know how to let go of their control, let go of the way they look at their child. Having said that, for parents to start to see you as an adult, the good way is to have specific conversations. For example, instead of saying, "How was your day? What happened at school?" You can say things like, I remember you had a test. How did that go? What is it like to be completely stressed out? Make the questions very specific.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
That's the
That's a
short
good
answer.
advice. Yeah. So to conclude, we just have one final question that's more relevant to our time right now. So obviously right now with everything going on, the pandemic and how we're all stuck in our homes, it can feel as though sometimes there's more tension than usual because we're spending so much time with each other, obviously, and we don't have that escape that going to work or going to school or just leaving the house in general like provides us. So what would be your biggest piece of advice for families right now?
Okay, so one way to reduce your own anxiety is to designate different rooms that you will spend time in during the day. For example, if you never spend time in your parents' room, swap room. They will spend a few hours in your room. I don't know if you like that or not. And you will spend time in their room and not have any connection so that you have a different surrounding, just a different place. And also, this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity to strengthen your identity as Asian Americans. You can start to do a scrapbook, a family scrapbook. Listen to your parents' stories, telling you where your name come from, where your last name come from, because for Chinese family, last name is a huge thing. It's your clan, right? To have that, to write a book about your family. This will help, I believe this will help the teenagers have a sense of stronger identity as Asian American and also bring harmony to family. And this is very important for Chinese family, familial harmony. And hopefully during this time will not be too long where you can come out with a better sense of who you are as a family and as an individual.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's great advice.
So sorry for dragging this webinar a little longer than expected, but I think you gave excellent answers. So I think that does it. Thank you so much for participating in this discussion with us. I definitely think the tips you gave should be taken to heart. A lot of them were great. So
thank you for having me.
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
And thank you to the audience for joining us and submitting your questions. They were great. I know I'm going to walk away from this discussion with a lot of good tips that I'm definitely going to share with my parents to help strengthen our bonds. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're
Yeah.
welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for organizing.
Yes,
No problem.
great job, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that does it. So I hope you have a nice day. I hope the audience has a nice day. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.